Hi, good evening.
Hi, good evening.
Hi, Maninder.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I did join the Google Meet first by mistake, Melita. Then I got your message, so I figured. Thank you for sending me that message.
Sorry, I think even Manaz got confused because of that.
Thank you, because it's helped.
Yeah, because that's what even I thought. I did the same thing. So that's why I told Milita that I'm sure, that pops up at the first.
First part, correct.
Yeah, the
correct.
first
This
part,
is
even when I
far
just tried.
less. Yeah, this is far at the bottom of the mail.
Yeah. Hi, Tanay.
Hello, hello.
Hi, Tanay.
Hi.
And as promised, here I am on the camera as well.
Lovely. So we have one panel member short. I just came to know. So Bhavna will not be joining. That's why I said maybe the second question, probably, and of course we could build on each other's, reflections as well, because there'll be that much more richer in terms of the conversation.
Sure. Yesterday, hey, sorry. I couldn't attend the call yesterday or day before. I just wanted to know who is the moderator.
So Maninder, I'm moderating the session, but as I mentioned, it'll be more like a conversation. And what I will do is maybe some questions I'll specifically call out the name as per the WhatsApp chat that we put up for a question. But it's great if we can build on each other's answers and share
Yeah, happy to. Absolutely. Yeah, we're all passionate about it, so I'm sure we'll have lots to share.
Absolutely.
And interestingly, yesterday I was at that People Matters conference at the Grand Hyatt. First time after a long time, it was a physical meeting. And we realized they had 5 questions, and you wouldn't believe, Manaz, we could only finish 2. There were so many inputs that everybody wanted to share. So just be prepared for that too, because everybody, when they get passionate and they want to share, sometimes we kind of spend a lot of time on that 1 or 2 questions only.
Yeah.
What's get covered. Yeah.
Absolutely. Melita, you're on mute. I'm Melita. We are at 4:30.
Yeah, hi. I suppose we are still waiting for one person to join in.
Okay, and Vinita has joined in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, hi, Munaz. Nidhi is also joining in.
Right.
So do
right.
we wait or do I go take it live now?
Um,
Or just wait for a minute and go live? Would that
no,
be fine?
we could do that, but I'm just saying, okay, Nidhi is just joining in, right? So fine. And there's Purvi as well.
Yes, Purvi
And
also.
Nidhi is joining.
I think Nidhi is there now.
Yes, absolutely. So Vinita, you and Nidhi from the same organization?
Yes, yes. So Nidhi is in the panel, Munaz. I'm just joining in,
Absolutely.
Okay, since all have joined in, I think I shall go live and we'll
Yeah.
start with it.
All the best.
So
All the
please
best.
mute yourselves now.
Is it me hearing? Thanks.
Mute all now, please.
In the live stream.
Hmm.
Well, let's start. Wait. If she started, when we know.
Good evening, everyone. I am Melita D'Souza, and on behalf of India Diversity Forum, I'd like to welcome all of you to another edition of DNI Pe Charcha, presented by Novartis, an initiative by India Diversity Forum. As always, the objective of this Charcha is for us to learn from one another. Our discussion today is focused on the inclusion of professionals with disability and how crucial it is to sensitize the masses of the challenges PWDs face across the globe. Recently, actor and dancer Sudha Chandran hit headlines after she shared her ordeal at an airport in India. Sudha was at the airport and asked to remove her prosthetic limb despite her request to not remove it because of a discomfort it causes to her. The CISF personnel on duty did not pay heed or show any signs of empathy. After the incident came to light, the Central Industrial Security Force issued an apology on social media and promised that they will look into the matter and examine why the lady personnel concerned requested Sudha Chandran to remove the prosthetics. This is one of the many challenges PWDs have to face. Many we may not even know go unheard, unreported. It is time we separate the individual and disability and not see them as one. As we observe the World Disability Day on the 3rd of December each year, let us acknowledge there are over 1 billion people, that's about 15% of world population, living with disabilities. This is a sizable population, and thus it is absolutely pertinent to increase the PWD representation in the workforce, especially in India. This is not possible without understanding their plight and sensitizing the masses of the struggles and challenges they undergo. In today's Charcha, leading DNI experts will deliberate on how to create an inclusive environment for professionals with disabilities. Also, get insights on how our organizations empowering professionals with disabilities across India Inc. Let us begin a charcha on why are HR policies reluctant and silent when it comes to disability inclusion. And for that, I would like to introduce our esteemed panelist of this discussion. Maninder Kapoor Puri, Chief People Officer for Mastek Limited. Purvi Patel, Managing Director from Design and Planning Council, Ahmedabad. Nidhi Jain, Director HR and Corporate HR Leader, EY India. Tanay K. Dial, VP and COO from Allstate. And a moderator for the session is Munaz Noble, Chief Financial Officer, NGSC and NBS India from Novartis. Over to you, Munaz.
Thank you, Malika. And Malika, as you mentioned, people with disability represents 15% of the world's population. But because 80% of the disabilities are invisible, that number is likely to be much, much higher. Further compounded to that is that 80% of the disabilities are acquired between the ages of 16 to 64. And therefore, it's critical to understand that any one of us could become a person with disability at any time. And to bring out this entire conversation today, as you rightly said, how do we actually run and aim towards a disability inclusion for our associates, for our society, for the broader stakeholders to feel safe, seen, heard, and valued for who they are, and so that they may participate and all of us, along with us, as equal members of our organization and society. We may not have all the answers, nor the policies and the framework, Milita, which you mentioned about right now. But I guess what we are really creating are open spaces, where we could have this conversation, and from there we could kind of pick up ideas as well as the valuable work that each organization is doing. And probably just to start off this conversation, let's start with biases and mindset, right? And let me invite Tanay to open up the first question that I would like to, put across. And I wouldn't say a question, open up this conversation or the chai pe charcha. And the question is really, Tanay, what are the barriers for PWD representation in workforce? And do organizations have a preset notion on the roles for the disabled, or do they consider them on their skills and professional competencies? So what are some of your experiences that you could share with all of us?
Thank you, and good afternoon, good evening, and thank you, Manaz, for that question, and to IDF and for the rest of the panelists to be here and talking about it. Earlier in the month, definitely December 3rd, we all celebrated it, but it isn't just a day, and beyond that throughout the year in there. But before I start responding to your question, now I will say that the topic does make you think, and in my mind, I would have twisted the topic a bit more to say, well, what is that we really need to be doing, whether it is in terms of environment, whether it is in terms of policy or the ecosystem, to be further supportive in terms of the cause. And I'm hoping at the end of the conversation, we talk a bit more about that. You've talked about 15% or maybe higher than that in terms of the world population. And is that anywhere near to the workforce that we have? And visible, invisible, you've kind of touched on that in there as well. And I would say we are very far from that. And like with any other diverse segment or from a diversity perspective, clearly there are some challenges that we are all struggling with. I know for us at Allstate, we have been, especially with respect to PWD, we have been on this journey for the last 4 or 5 years. 2017, 16 is when we started. And in the last couple of years, we've really structured it well with an employee resource group to drive that. But yet I feel, not just for us, but within the industry, we are just scratching the surface. Like with everybody else, we started with some of the visible ones, like an ortho disability, and then translating into hearing and learning and visual in that senses. But like I was saying, it is still scratching the surface. We are far from the 21. And a regular bias that I feel as hiring managers that, when we internally talk about it, is that typical affinity bias. And in terms of the hiring manager ending up to look for somebody very similar to him or her, or really looking for things that, that give them a comfort. And there is an inherent discomfort to talk about it. To me, if we have to really work against this bias, a lot of it is towards re-looking at our evaluation process. Just the way we currently evaluate candidates puts a natural bias or a disadvantage as far as the PWD is concerned. Again, like a video chat that we are talking about. In there itself, and there is technology to really support there, but in there itself, there are certain biases that start coming in. Search for verbal or really visual clues when you're interviewing. That adds to that bias in there as well. It's a lot towards internally training our hiring managers, internally training our HR groups, internally training the talent acquisition to be able to overcome some of these biases that inherently come there in there. And we have been working quite actively with that ecosystem. And when I talk about ecosystem, those community groups, when I talk about the ecosystem, specific talent acquisition agencies that we work to affirmatively push forward in this direction. So long story short, I think some of it is in terms of the bias, in terms of the challenges, in terms of those mindsets that we are really working with, is within our own selves that we really need to be overcoming to take it forward and drive it in that direction. That's how I would put it.
Great. And I guess that probably then, sets us thinking as to, do organizations have the right policies and framework to create awareness? Because I guess one of the way to kind of overcome, let's say, a mindset or an is to drive awareness. And for example, as you said, All States started a couple of 4-5 years ago. Similarly was with Novartis, where globally also we started off on this whole journey of having PWD as part of our D&I kind of agenda. However, I think the first step that we kind of recognized was to create awareness amongst all the associates, right? So, and that that awareness comes through ERGs, as you said, employee resource groups, through trainings. It also, to some extent, we felt comes through by storytelling and sharing individual experiences. So, of course, it's a whole host of journey, but I would really like to hear from all the panelists here in terms of what are some of those framework policies that individually, let's say, organizations are driving to create awareness around disability inclusion.
And if I can make the first attempt, just in continuation, if that is fine. In my mind, when we start talking about the policies, I kind of classify them as hardware and software, and I'm kind of trying to put it in that form and shape. Quite instinctively, as we have started, and as within the industry, we see the hardware side of it. So if it is related to physical infrastructure, if it is related to, and I know on the panel we have some in there, and maybe we'll be able to hear a little more in detail in there as well. But from Purvi, but there as well. So do we have the right physical infrastructure in place? Do we really have a way in which we can get the access sorted out? Do we really have the way people come into office or are able to do their work? Is there policy in place? Is there infrastructure in place? I think on the hardware side, there's been a lot that has kind of gone in. On the software side, and where I mean the softer side of those policies, is where a lot more push still needs to be brought in. So some of the easy, low-hanging fruit ones, those I think have been sorted out in terms of the way we look at insurance, in terms of the way we look towards getting the technology solutions in place, in the way we really get it going. Yes, but I think there is an opportunity to be doing a lot more in there. But to me, not just the policy or the guideline, I think it is also internally the practices within the organization. And one is from a diversity and getting that piece into it, but the other is the inclusion part of it in there as well. And then if I'm really talking from an inclusion perspective, many of us work with the US geography, and we constantly talk about that, hey, if you want us to be included, get the meetings to happen in a time slot that's kind of supportive for both the geographies. And that's how you'd be able to get people in this geography included. It's no different if I talk from a PWD perspective as well. How do we provide that access? How do we rearrange ourselves to be helping get folks included in, to me, that is also equally important along with the policies. So I'll pause here.
Mona, is that okay if I go next? Just I have a couple of things. So I think for me, if I have to answer this question, I think it's important to understand the immediate meaning and, what is the full scope of disability when we are speaking about it, and what does it mean for disability inclusion? Now, disability inclusion actually means understanding the relationship, right, between the way people function and how they participate in society, and making sure everybody, irrespective of disability or no disability, has the same opportunities to participate in every aspect of life to the best of their abilities and desires, right? I think where organizations play a huge role, and we've seen that there are a lot of best practices out there. If you look at Nike, the advertisements, the models are disabled, right? And it's not that it's not inclusive. I think at Mastek itself, we have people with disabilities, and there are things that are provided to them, or the infrastructure available in the office pre-pandemic was available for, and it was changed for people with disabilities. So I think organizations, it's not just about policies, it's about the whole feel, experience, the attitude of the entire team, right from leadership downwards. I think that's important. If they accept, pretty much everybody does. I think the language that is spoken within the organization plays a huge role as well. So policy can only define so much because it's written. Now, adherence to policy cannot really define it because that's not the way to, really run with it. But I'm not saying it's not important. It is important. But beyond that, I think it's about the attitudinal change within the organization that is most important, followed by creating a long-term value creation. Do we also have career paths for them within irrespective of whether people with disability, non-disability? Are we providing them the same mentoring, coaching that is available to everybody? And I think somewhere Tane mentioned it, right? We all look with our own bias, and sometimes these biases are unconscious. We automatically tend to believe that somebody with disability may have disability in the brain, which is not true, right? It's just that they've had a physical disability or some other kind of disability, but can be managed. So I think it's all about how we work around the entire ecosystem and the landscape that is available to them within the organization. I think that's more important than just doing a tick in the box of policies. I think we need to go beyond policies and create an ecosystem for them. For me, I think just to add to what Tanay mentioned, that is important.
Munaz, I could go next. Sure. I think while policies are extremely important to bring in the regime, the discipline, I think I totally agree with some of the points Maninder made, and I'd like to share some broader aspects that we have at EY tried to address to be able to make disability inclusion not only a focus area, but inclusion as a whole, as a way of life and the way we do business. I think one thing which is extremely important is the leadership commitment. And I think the second piece is about really cascading that commitment across the organization. Now, sitting at the helm, if the senior leadership believes or has commitment, but it's really not translating on the ground, then there is little that we will be able to achieve in terms of outcomes. Now, we realized, we're a large organization, geographically, number of people, businesses, etc. We set up a working group of partners in each location. Our partners are leaders in each location. So we set up this working group. And this set of partners was really responsible to sort of take the commitment from the senior leadership down to actual action on the ground, whether it was discussion with other partners to get in the right roles where we can actually get people with different abilities to come in, or it was really answering questions for people, or it was really bringing issues from the ground to the top or from the ground to the central teams who could actually work on sort of addressing these issues. I think that went a long way in terms of really translating our commitment into action across locations, across offices, across businesses for us at EY. So I think that piece in terms of having a commitment and making that commitment very visible and making sure that it's actioned on the ground with the right set of people who will have the right set of influence opportunities and will have the platforms really to make that difference, or, like I said, have the influence really to make that difference. I think the second piece, which Maninder, you pointed out, was about inclusive language. And I couldn't agree more. I think language can really bring in that exclusion or inclusion in the organization because, from times immemorial, that's the way we express ourselves. That's the way we talk to each other. That's the way we, sort of communicate, share information. And sometimes, and it's also wired into our systems that a lot of times when we don't consciously include, we subconsciously exclude. I think there has to be a conscious attempt to really bring in that inclusion. And an interesting thing that we did at EY was that we actually created something called an inclusive dictionary. Now, this dictionary actually has simple phrases to avoid or use, simple day-to-day language, words, etc., that people should avoid using or people should use more of consciously, to make sure that there are people around who will not feel excluded. So I think that was another thing that went a long way in, and the way we cascaded it was again through our leadership group, our partner group that is working on this. So I think these two things really made a huge difference. And yes, obviously, I think in the framework of the policies, which really make your commitment visible in the organization.
I couldn't agree, more to this, Nidhi, and specifically talking about leaders, right? And leaders normally, when they make choices, they also kind of create the culture for an organization. And one of the things is that globally, I think there are 500, influential global leaders of different organizations, of which Novartis is one of them, who joined together to create the valuable 500, right? And I think it's a very simple, powerful message because if business is inclusive, society will be inclusive. And besides, business seeing it really important of being intentional about, inclusion, including, PWD as well. And it's not just good for the business, but I think it's also good in terms of the talent retention and attraction, because I think a lot of the Gen Z now are very, very emotive and, and I don't know about, Tanay, you mentioned about ERGs. So we have one of the ERGs. So there are 3 ERGs of PWD across the world. One is in the US. I don't know where the other one is, but one is in India. And we do have a lot of young, committed, passionate Gen Zs who basically drive this whole thing. So I feel the messaging and the culture comes and emanates mainly from, the leaders. And of course, language, definitely. Language is, as they say, right? You could kill someone with words, right? So, I mean, and it transcends every human being to that extent. But no, I think great. Some of the things, run a common thread across for all of us. Let me maybe probably, come to you, Purvi, since Tanay alluded towards, having accessible workplaces. So what has been your experience in creating inclusive workplace, Purvi? Since this is a space that, you must be having a lot of experience and stories to tell us.
Thank you, Manaz, and thank you everyone else. I will just try to introduce a little bit of perspective on this, that this whole idea of creating physical infrastructure that is also friendly to disabled people has 2 aspects. It started in Western countries sort of after the wars, where a lot of young people who went and fought in the war got disabled, and that is when these countries really started implementing disability measures, fixes in the buildings. That is one. And we all have to remember that as far as the physical environment or buildings are concerned, we are all disabled for part or a major part of our lives, when we are young, when we are old, when we are injured, when we are pregnant, or we are unwell in some manner. So in buildings, when we are commissioning designers to help us, we have to remember that it is not how it looks, which is what gets discussed most of the time, but how it works. So this is what we have to say. And typically we have found that not a lot of money is required to do this in a building or outside the building. Sometimes only the knowledge is deficient and the focus of the leadership on that aspect. So if you employ somebody who has requisite knowledge, knows all the guidelines, all the standards which are required to implement a PWD friendly design, then it goes a long way. Then there is another aspect that organizations may take care of, and that is accessibility audit. So if you involve a disabled user, of course, I mean, we can use nicer words, but if you have a disabled user come and audit once the building is done, then whatever mistakes we have made earlier, before during the design stage and execution stage, we can fix them and rectify it, and therefore the environment will be much more friendly in terms of dignity, mobility and independence of not just disabled people, but it will be used by everyone on board more easily. Thanks.
No, great. And I think since you spoke about accessibility in offices, one thought came to my mind is, given the pandemic, probably for the last year and a half, we've seen a lot of, including us, right, associates working from home or working from wherever they are. And probably, Maninder, if you could share, what are maybe the challenges, and I would say current challenges, because still offices are not back to where they were pre-pandemic. So what were some of the challenges, let's say, that you picked up or your organization picked up? And of course, the world is not going to be the same as we come back working together. It's going to be a hybrid model. So there again, what would be those different challenges? And probably we could again do a round discussion, go around with all the panelists here. It will be really great to get insights.
Sure. Thanks, Manaz, for the question. So for me, I think for persons with disabilities, I think the pandemic and frequent lockdowns that have happened in the last year and a half have come with diverse challenges, right? From sourcing essential supplies to working from home or remote locations, and also, getting regular medical assistance. I don't think, if for us it was tough, and I think it was tougher for them. We transitioned from office to work from home, right? They, world over, people faced with insecurities of one, lack of accessibility, sometimes even, lack of physical interaction. There is no visibility of body language apart from, above the shoulder when we even on Zoom calls or any other calls, right? So there is a bit of, in a way, exclusive, culture that automatically builds in for everybody, irrespective of people with disability. So that happens. And then the language that we speak also doesn't really help. So I think it's been tougher for them. The change in environment, the restricted movement meant, operating from personal space, which may not have all the tools available to them or for them. Not everybody has equipped with their office space. And especially people with disability, I think would have been tougher to sit on a desk or a chair for a long period of time, not being able to move as much as, especially if you're living in Mumbai, the square foot space is only so much available. I think so. It's been very, very tough on them. Now, if we were to open up offices and a hybrid work model, I think frequency of in-person interaction is still limited. But I think the intent would be that how do you sensitize team members, managers, workforce leaders on what constitutes inclusiveness? I think a lot more than what it was earlier. I think empathy, gratitude has suddenly come to the fore in all organizations, and that continues to be a trend that one will see for a long, long time. Attitudinal change, I keep coming back to that, is very important. And I think we need to be absolutely accepting and empathetic towards what people with disability have been through in the last year and a half. I think far more tougher situations than we have. And also and when we talked about language, there was very interesting thing, that Nidhi mentioned, and even you, in a way, talked about it. For example, if there are incorrect statements being made, I think we are not taught this in schools either, because we're not taught to question. And like you said, Gen Zs are far more, I think, right out there, and they have the ability to really give their probably their mindset. They're happy to share. They don't necessarily have a filter. But Gen Zs are still, only 10% right now in the organization. We still have Gen Y and Gen X that we're dealing with. And I think the fact that, for example, to say things like, why would you think that's okay thing to say to somebody like that? Or if that is not really funny. I think we don't realize in our jokes, even in WhatsApp messages or, signal messages, that the jokes that go around. And it's not that everybody now has, WhatsApp has become a way of communicating in every organization, within teams, especially after lockdown. So what kind of language we're using there as well, and kind of jokes we're sharing, or the kind of messages that we forward, is also very important to keep an eye on. And while, you can, again, going back to policies, you can do that. But I think when you get to hybrid, this will continue. Now, imagine if you've shared a joke in a poor light for somebody with this disability. When they get to work, they come with that sense of, that I'm not respected here. And for me, respectability, with literally hyphenated respect and ability, I think that is most important. If we can put that in the organization, then I think we have a workforce that is, or the organization that is fit for accepting people with disability. So for me, of course, the other bit is the whole infrastructure design, and now with 6 feet apart and all of that, hopefully it should only help us in that sense. I think we'll also need to create far more provisions than we've always had. And while I know we're talking mostly about physical disability, but I think pandemic has also brought in a lot of mental disability. And we need to acknowledge that people are going through depressions. There are people who've lost their loved ones in the last 2 years. They have been through a very, very tough time. I mean, there are families who have been wiped out and, that we've heard of. So I think the whole bit of being empathetic, being able to appreciate and understand what people have been through, and disability is not always seen. Right? So it doesn't matter whether somebody is physically, you can see it, but if you can't, even then, how are we absolutely interacting with each other and talking to each other also plays a huge role. So that is what, and I think the whole bit about, everybody is working on wellness of physical, mental, emotional, and all of that. And that continues to be I think will continue to be the order of the day. But I think it'll be all encompassing. It can't be just, fixing the infrastructure and saying I've done enough. So I think everybody, and fortunately for us, I think in our organization, because, the leaders have been very, very supportive, we've managed to do a lot of things already. We're sprucing up our offices, changing them completely. As we speak, we are looking to, we already have wellness programs of 6 different kinds. There are apps available for Mastekeers. As a matter of fact, we've extended them to 2 other family members, that counseling is available to them, because we've realized that it's not about just physical disability. I think there's a lot more that people are dealing with, either sense of loss, sense of loneliness, and so many other. And I think we'll have to also acknowledge that has not yet come to India as much, while we do talk about just a simple bit of depression, but I think there's a lot more of, ADHD and all of that, which we've not yet acknowledged in this country as of now. And now I think organizations are waking up to the fact that we need to acknowledge and we need to look at a workplace that is far more inclusive for everybody, irrespective of physical or mental disability.
Yeah, and Maninder, if I can just pick up on the last one where you talked about wellness and counseling, being provided by organizations. I think earlier on, even though there were counseling, provisions there, I guess, including maybe, us as well, were a little inhibited in terms of either speaking up, taking those kind of facilities that were there. But what pandemic has really kind of taught is, it's okay, you could kind of reach out, and it somehow has kind of worked as a social fiber for the organizations. So there's been a lot more talking about it, a lot more storytelling, sharing experiences. And I think that's what's kind of helped, a lot of us to kind of come up front and, deal with these kind of pressures and kind of,
I just add one more thing, Mona. So we have people with hearing disability, right, in our organization. So what we've actually done within teams that they work in, we've taken them to a sign language training. So leaders have been through a sign language training. So the intent is, look, if and Nidhi mentioned it wonderfully, that, if you're not seen to be doing it, or it's not visible, it's not out there, then people don't necessarily know that I'm being included. So I think those are small things that one can do, or an organization should be looking to do, so that, there is this bit about, look, I am being inclusive. I'm trying to learn your language to speak with you and to understand you.
Yeah. No, and just maybe last, another point that you brought about sign language, I think I've also seen a lot of, kind of promotion in terms of, what do you call as audio description, right? So a little bit more about your physical description of the speaker, or things like that, so that probably it helps, again, a wide variety of, associates going through that entire, and primarily, I think, because it's so much of visual interaction as we moved into the pandemic and probably into, the hybrid as well. And I think that, helps me to segue, Nidhi, and I could probably draw your kind of, thoughts around the entire piece of technology. So I think one of the things, and technology is an equalizer, right, to a large extent. It does give you that equitable kind of opportunity, and transcends, again, different parts of the society. What are your thoughts in terms of how, organizations could leverage technologies to empower PWD?
Sure, Munaz. I think that's a great question, and I'd love to sort of share my thoughts and share some real stories, success stories that we have at EY, which could probably help us get more context around this. Now, obviously, whether technology or AI, it can definitely amplify integration of people with different abilities into the workplace. I think it can help a great deal in terms of supporting upskilling as well. We at EY very strongly believe that technology can actually help us in two ways from an inclusion of people with different abilities perspective. While it can actually help the workplace become a lot more accessible, not just physically, but all resources, whether presentations or your documents, etc., make everything more accessible for people. At the same time, this whole technology and the growth in this space can actually open avenues for people with different abilities by creating more uncurated jobs. Now, I'm going to share a bit more about this. I actually, like I said, want to share two stories from EY. We have a team which is working out of Chennai. It's called the MIST team, the Monitoring Information and Security Threat Lab. Now, currently, this team has about 26 members, and out of those, there are 5 who are differently able. This team essentially works with a lot of standardized processes, requires a lot of, working with lesser distractions and working in a very high concentration sort of an environment. Now, keeping this in mind, initially, there were 3 people who were hired in this team, and these were people with, speaking and hearing disability. These people were so good at working in that sort of, ecosystem and environment that we hired 2 more within the same year. And like Maninder mentioned, there was so much done in terms of actually training these people on sign language, training the rest of the team on sign language. So, all of that was obviously done. In addition to that, we actually introduced a speech to text collaborative tool. Now, this is a tool which has been designed within EY, and it actually converts all the team inputs to texts during a particular meeting. So this actually went a long way in making those people feel included. And, this was so prompt and immediate in terms of its outcome, that they did not feel that, there was a lapse or a lag in terms of getting information as compared to the rest of the team members. Like I said, technology obviously helped us in documenting all relevant policies or work processes, information, etc. It just became more easy for these people to read and follow. Now, I have personally interacted with the MIST team, and I can say that, they are champions in what they do. From actually performing very complex processes to delivering on very stringent timelines, there is really nothing these people cannot do. I think this was one, success story around how technology can actually enable people with different abilities and their inclusion into the workplace. Another another story that I want to share is more around how technology has helped us create more and curated jobs, in this space. So like I said, with this whole rapid growth in technology, and, obviously, I would say that the pandemic was really a watershed moment. In EY itself, we have a huge tech practice, and here we help our clients across sectors in the areas of digital transformation, cybersecurity, or ERP implementation. Now, this gives us huge opportunities to really create jobs for people with different abilities. Particularly in the growing business opportunities for cybersecurity, we were actually looking at hiring people who are obviously from a technology perspective, very inclined to technology, detail oriented, people who have very strong skills in analytics, math, pattern recognition, or for that matter, information processing. So we were actually looking for people like these. And then we actually shortlisted 13 people where in these roles, we actually saw I would say a clear role for people with neurodiverse abilities. They were on the spectrum of autism. Like I said, we shortlisted about 13 people through a week of very eased out real work environment simulation. We tested their ability, adaptability, agility, etc. And that's how we actually onboarded our first set of neurodiverse candidates in the cybersecurity practice in December 2020. And, it's been going absolutely great with this first batch of neurodiverse hires. We are actually looking at replicating this experience in other tech roles as well. I would say that, yes, this is also a proud moment for us because EY India was actually amongst the first few EY regions to actually get neurodiverse candidates to work in roles in technology. So I think technology really works in both ways in terms of, like I said, creating a very enabling environment, and at the same time, a huge opportunity to look at roles for people with different abilities.
Oh, great. Thanks so much, Nidhi. Lots of stories and very interesting indeed. And as you were talking about this, one thing that came to my mind was, at least at Novartis, another thing that we're using AI is to mitigate the bias in the process design. So there's this thought in terms of, that when we actually design processes, because, people are looking at similar kind of outlook, have a similar kind of a mindset, a lot of times the data set used creates a bias in the process. And how do you kind of, remove that or mitigate that? So as I mentioned in Novartis, we are building user experience to persona creation that will be a key. And so that it becomes important that we create, inclusive process design, remove the unconscious bias building into the process itself. Because sometimes we may not really be aware that the processes are so the way that we normally look at things and not really kind of be inclusive across a wide spectrum of, our associates who are using those processes. So I just thought that's another angle I would like to, bring forth here. Any more insights from anyone round the panel, then we could move, to a next thought that I have. Okay. So I can see, we've had a rich conversation around, various, facets of this whole conversation. And I do see that companies and organizations are looking to change and, looking to adapt, right? But there's one thing that, it's still kind of out there, is that how could we, and we also talked about leadership, right? How could we encourage PWD to join our organization? So what are those thought processes? If somebody wants to join and is, it's a person with disability, how would he, she, it, kind of approach, the organization and not feel inhibited by the organization? So what are those doors that we are creating, for our future associates to, walk through our doors of organization? Any thoughts there?
If I can go, this is not exactly an answer to what you are asking, but the aspect that when we are looking for professionals, we are actually looking at universities and before that at schools. So HR can really come on board by going and actively looking during campus interviews, because a disabled person, whether it is mental or physical disability, has had a very long journey just coming to the profession, educated and trained. So if we have like a holistic system whereby there is a bit of CSR fund focused on giving to schools and universities so that they can encourage either scholarships or a better infrastructure for encouraging people with disability to be a resource for organizations in future. So this is where I think the dots might connect. And if you can think of an active way of promoting this when people are young and making a decision about how capable they are, because then they are going to push. When they are young, they want to have this encouragement, and that companies can provide either by individual role models or by having a policy of encouragement. This is what I had to offer. Thanks.
Sanay, I can see.
No, I would say even sessions like this is a good place to start in there as well. Just the participation for multiple companies to come in and talk about how they are actively working in the space is equally endearing across the various segments to be able to look towards them. So I would say absolutely any start is a good enough start. Internally, I will say, and I'll speak from an all-state perspective, I think for us, the journey has also been to first, and over the last many years, internally work with our existing set of people to help them understand and be able to appreciate of what is out there in the market. I know in the last few months, with the war for talent that is on, everybody is scrambling wherever there is a need to be doing in every form and shape. But specifically, if we are talking about diversity, and in this case, if we are talking about PWD, it is to be being clearly aware that it is a business imperative. It is to be clearly aware that it needs to be led from the front, from a leadership perspective. I think Nidhi was talking about how the business leaders, and I think she was talking about partners, and how at that group level, there has been an engagement. You spoke about it to say even at a global level, how companies have got together to be able to drive that. I know for us as well, and globally for all state in there, especially from a PWD perspective, we have driven that agenda and publicly been acknowledged, whether it is as the top 20 in the Fortune 500, which is nothing but a message out there to say, yes, we are investing in this direction. But at the end of the day, this is really to talk about it, but it really is in terms of acknowledging every human being. And as those individuals come into the organization, as we look towards hiring in that direction, how we do right from the first point of contact through the process to onboarding and within the organization, that really makes the story even more real in there as well. And I would also talk about having ambassadors in that direction. And when I talk about having ambassadors in that direction, in that journey, if we look across the other diversity angles in there, I think some of them have been led for a period of time. There are enough role models that we can think about. But within the space, knowing that there are visible and invisible in there, how do we create more of those ambassadors and role models will be an equally important thing. And I think that's where we need to be investing.
So Manas, I'll share a few from my experience. I think when you look at, to create an organization and have the leadership buy-in within the organization, I think it's the most important. I think companies over a period of time will cease to exist if you don't become an inclusive culture. It will become very tough for us to, because with Gen Z coming into the workforce and with their, complete focus on these social values is very different. So if we need to be relevant, I think it will be important. And if we don't do it now, I don't think it'll ever happen. And, this entire COVID scenario has actually been a blessing in disguise in that sense, where companies have realized that it's important to just step up and be empathetic towards everybody. Apart from that, I think when we look at promoting diversity, equity, inclusion in any workspace, I think it'll have to be sincerely started from the top leaders. I think Nidhi mentioned, you mentioned Monas, right? And Tane also just kind of mentioned, culture always flows from the top. And if leaders are not seen to be doing the right things and not visible out there, I don't think it'll ever get percolated down the rank. I also believe, I think many organizations, while may not be talking about it, but I think every organization is doing something or the other. And like Tane mentioned, I think this is the forum to talk about. We've never actually discussed within DEI gone towards people with disability. Normally, it's about gender and whole LGBTQI, etc. I think now the whole world is stepping up, and it's such a refreshing conversation to have, because the world is changing. And like you mentioned, right, there are 15% of the world population are people with disability. So in a way, isn't that going to be our future workforce? So why are we losing out that huge chunk of people not being part of our workforce? So I think somewhere there is a huge opportunity out there that I think we as organizations are missing out. So even if you have to make a business case, which I hope we don't need to, but even if we need to, I think we have a brilliant business case out there. Nidhi just shared a lovely example, and there are a lot of examples that are available in various organizations that people are using to their advantage. There are Braille laptops available today, right? So I think it's all about how we channelize our energies, how much time we are focusing on it, how much hours we spend on creating that inclusive environment within the organization. So I just want to thank the DI, the Diversity India Forum, to even bring this to fore and to us to even speak about it. I think so. It is kind of like a aha moment, I think, for all organizations and for all of us, that this needs to come back on the table and talked about as much as possible. So that's from me. Thank you.
I could quickly go next, Munaz, and I think I cannot agree with more with some of the points that Tanay and Maninder made, and that's exactly what we have done at EY. And I can share with a lot of pride and confidence that is what has worked as well. I think two broad things. One, showcasing role models. I think that goes a long way in terms of giving people the confidence that if they with a certain different ability or a disability have been able to follow their career ambitions and are at the top today. So when I say role models, while it's great to share role models across levels, I think it'll be great if we can bring forward certain leaders who are role models for people to really see that, this organization or this workplace will not, your growth and your advancement is not going to get compromised on just because of a certain different ability. And I think adding to that, I think what is extremely important, and I don't know, I think it will take a while before, corporate India really, I think, takes cognizance of that. Let me say that we've taken cognizance of this, but I think we need to bring this into action. We need to make sure that when we are hiring people with different abilities, we are not looking at support roles. We are not looking at roles which have just been created as not mainstream roles for certain people in the organization. I think what is very critical is to make sure that they are part of running your business as any other individual is. And when you make them mainstream, when you get them into mainstream roles, they follow the same career path and they have the same opportunities for growth and development. I think you've done your job. You have created that workplace. And I will just go back to my story on the neurodiverse candidates that we hired for the cybersecurity practice. They are in client-facing roles. They are in mainstream roles, and that just gave a lot of other groups the confidence. It was a success story, and at the same time, I think mainstream roles, really that combination gave people a lot of comfort and confidence there. So I think these would be my 2 cents in how we can go out there and make our commitment visible, and therefore have more and more people with different abilities wanting to join us.
Absolutely. And I guess if I could just quickly summarize, there are these for 5 secret ingredients, for the source. One is, of course, leaders, leadership, basically driving, walking the talk. Language, again, very important. It's very integral to us as human beings. Technology and AI for sure is an enabler. Workplaces, again, and I loved the way, Purvi, you mentioned it, that you're right. Sometimes, you may be kind of the person with disability because you have either an ACL tear and you never know when that kind of attacks you, right? Or you kind of end up there. So I thought it was really beautiful that each one of us, those offices are for each one of us, not really from any other distinction purpose. I also liked what Tanay mentioned about ambassadors and role models. So, and I think Nidhi also, you also alluded to the same thing, that, successful stories at the same time role models who kind of, made it out there and are kind of really, the role models that we could showcase. So I guess these are probably the 6 pillars, if I may say, to take it forward. And again, just one more statistics. I don't know about India, but globally, I believe 90% of the companies who do have D&I as an agenda, only 4% of part of that is actually, the mind share is towards PWD. So I really don't know from an India perspective specific, but what I really find heartening is that in whatever way that each one of you all explained and shared your stories, there's a very common theme and a common thread and a common awareness, right? So I really feel from here, we could only build stronger together to kind of, take this through. I do see a question. So Ruark has put up a question from the audience. Let me and I'll read out the question, and probably whoever feels you want to go first can go first. The question is, what do you perceive will be the landscape for PWD in the next 5 years? And I think by landscape they mean in terms of either percentage representation in workforce or leaders, basically who are from the PWD community. Invitation is open. If anybody wants to start the conversation.
I could go, Manoj. I would think that the PWD landscape, when we're talking about the landscape, I think 5 years from now, I think we are talking about, I will not really put a number there, because I think different organizations will be at different levels of or different stages of maturity in terms of their diversity and inclusion journey. But I think it's very clear that the focus that came on gender, say 10, 12, 15 years back, that focus is clearly there on people with different abilities in organizations today. I think we clearly understand there is a business case. It's really not just only the right thing to do, but also a business imperative. You cannot, sort of not take or ignore that huge talent that's available out there. I think we will be working on making conscious efforts to really bring people with different abilities into the workforce today. But I think within 5 years from now, I think it will, and it has to start working on an auto mode where, those conscious efforts have been made. That intentional inclusion has happened in terms of having the right policies, the right commitment, and the right ecosystem for people to really be able to perform at the same level. So I think that's how the PWD landscape should change for the better in the next 5 years.
And then if I could add to Nidhi in there as well, gender is one that we have all as an industry been working over the last many years. And I think we still have to go a lot of distance in there as well. And most of the time it gets spoken about in terms of the percentage participation. So if the question is, and there as well, we haven't still reached, and there are multiple ways to look towards that landscape in there. So will we get to that 15 or 20% from a PWD? If that's the only measure, I wouldn't really progress on that path. And just out of this conversation, at least two of those things that I would walk away and say, if that on the landscape, Purvi spoke about, and I know when we speak about PWD, there's always that question in terms of what's the right term to use. The one that has stuck with me always has been that all of us are temporarily abled. And I think that is a key part to it, that awareness across the industry, if that's there, to me, that's the landscape I'm talking about. And then the other, and just over the last few days, specifically on the trans woman piece of it, Saisha Shende's name has been out there. And in a similar sense, after Tare Zameen Pe, which is a movie, when Abhishek Bachchan said, well, I'm also dyslexic in there, to me, those are kind of things that need to start getting included in our day-to-day conversation, and being aware to say, yes, it is possible. I know for us, the ERG group is called ABLE, and I find that very powerful. It's really talking about without limitations and expectation. And I think that's really the direction in terms of the landscape in my mind.
If I could respond in a very personal view, this is going to be tough because India is going to have more and more young and able people entering the workforce. So it is actually going to be difficult to argue for people who are not fully geared and able, because the companies will look at profits and efficiency, and they would like to choose whoever delivers the best. And there is always the bias that we are fighting against. So difficult to let go of ableism. Okay, that is the bias we will have to fight. And the other thing is, knowledge about how to respond to this is fractured, and the time to make decision or time to make change is going to be more and more compressed, and we are in that urgent need to make quick decision. So that is a challenge that we will have to address. And there are better ways of learning with technology and with every kind of information that is easily available. So for professionals who make decisions, if we start walking the talk, in 5 years things will become better, but it's going to be more pressure and more difficult. This is how I see it. Thanks.
Yeah, I do want to bring in one point, Monas, here, and what I see and what I'm seeing, at least in the UK part of the business of us. A lot of clients are walking into the social value space, right? And there is an expectation that you will have people with disability at certain percentage. That's an expectation before even awarding us the business. So I think a lot of change will happen. I'm not that pessimistic about it. I'm talking about the first question here. I think it'll be far better than where we are today. We've started on this journey. I have a feeling it'll change quite a bit, because now because of this Gen Z coming in and the whole social value coming to the fore, I think organizations will need to step up, even if they don't want to, even if there's no business case or profitability is there, but they will have to build in terms of what happened to what Tane mentioned, right? To gender. That kind of, yes, we will have roadblocks. Yes, we will go through hoops to get there, like we are doing with women or with other genders. But I think it is going to be it is going to be a talk of the of boardroom conversations now around people with disability. I think there'll be a lot more focus. This is my view.
No, absolutely. And what I hear everyone saying is that, from here, I think build strength on strength. And, this is an agenda which is going to be very pertinent for all of us as businesses, as individuals. And so definitely a space, where we would have a lot many more conversations to, build this. And I also feel it's great to have these kind of conversations because that also creates awareness across the society as well. There's one last question, and I think then we could just close the panel discussion because we already shot 5 minutes over the thing. That was around role models for PWD. And if I could just quickly share that, one of the role model I really find is this lady called Caroline Cassie, who's the one who's the founder behind Value 500. It will be great, if people could Google and read about her, how she grew up with, with a disability, but she converted it into her kind of strength. And of course, there would be many more, examples and stories we could share from our individual organizations as well. But given the paucity of time, I think I will, reluctantly end our conversation here. Thank you so much, to the entire panel for sharing all your, views and thoughts without any inhibition. And thank you to India Diversity Forum and to Melitha as well. I'll hand it over to you, Melitha, if you have anything else to say here.
Yeah. Thank you, Munaz. Okay, that was an extremely informative session for all of us. Well, at this time, I'm reminded of a beautiful yet provocative quote that Helen Keller made. Alone we can do so little, together we can do so much. And I'm absolutely certain that our IDF members, as well as the other DNI leaders who joined us today, have benefited from this charcha. I want to express my gratitude to our panelists for their insightful thoughts and comments and for that engaging conversation. I'd like to thank our audience for joining in on the conversation and taking your time out of your busy schedule. In the next edition of DNI Pe Charcha presented by Novartis, we will have more DNI experts deliberate the many facets of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Once again, thank you for your time and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.